In the last video, we basically discussed the parts and the name of the parts inside the rotor head section that's over here. But today I would like just to elaborate a little bit and break the helicopter in two parts, the main head part and the tail part, and just give you a brief overview on the parts that is contained in this very brief overview. So I'm just quickly going to zoom the camera in and we can start from there. Okay, I've zoomed the camera in a bit. Okay, basically your whole entire helicopter is held together by two plates with a whole bunch of parts in the middle of them. These two plates are called the main frame. As you can see, those are little bolts that you can see there. All of them keeping the two sides of the main frame together. Okay, so let's move from the top of the helicopter and just try and explain to you the most important parts that you need to know about inside your mainframe, starting with this arm here, or this bracket here, which is called the anti-rotation bracket. You'll notice that the longest ball link or the long ball link from the swash plate goes through the anti-rotation bearing, and this prevents the swash plate from turning around once the rotor blade spins up. Quite an important bracket, this. One of the checks that you should always do on your helicopter is to make sure that this bracket is secure, not cracked. Okay. Moving down with the main shaft, inside the main frame here are two blocks. If you investigate them, you will notice that they actually do contain a bearing each. Some helicopters have 3 of them. This specific model only have 2 of these blocks, and they are called the bearing blocks because their main purpose is to house the bearings for the main frame. Also another part that you should check that is secure at all times, as a loose bearing block can cause severe vibration and can destroy the helicopter. Moving even further down on the helicopter, you will notice that there are 2 big gears here. One big one and one smaller one. The biggest one of them are called the main gear. Now the main gear is the gear that the motor drives directly on. So your helicopter motor will drive directly onto the main gear. Okay, right below that is the auto rotation gear. The auto rotation gear, inside the gear, contains a bearing which is called a one-way bearing. So what that means is the bearing will free the one way, and if you turn it the other way, will grip the shaft and then be able to transfer the power up into the rotor blade. Okay, the purpose of this gear, alongside with the one-way bearing gear, should the motor stall or stop, or whatever the case may be you would find happen with the motor, burn out, whatever, this would allow the gear to free without pulling the motor with it. So the rotor blade will then contain momentum for a longer time and allow you to auto-rotate the helicopter, hence the auto-rotation gear. The auto-rotation gear also drives the tail drive gear, which sits inside here and you cannot really see because it's all closed up inside the main frame, and that basically is connected to the tail belt, which then runs inside the tail boom to the back. Right, so let's just turn the helicopter upside down. And then another one thing that I would like to show you is this little plate in the bottom here. You'll notice that the screws of the main frame goes into this plate. This plate is called the bottom plate. Okay, now you can use the bottom plate to mount your receiver. I've mounted my receiver slightly a bit different, but normally you would mount your receiver onto the bottom plate here, and as you can see here, I've mounted my electronic speed controller to the front of this bottom plate here. Some people mount it on the side. I decided I wanted it mounted here, which is fine. Okay, Right to the top here, you see where these Velcro straps are. You'll see that there's a little bracket or a plate here. This is called the battery bracket. Okay, and your battery normally sits on that part there. Okay, not all helicopters has got a bracket like this. Sometimes they fit onto the bottom plate, like with the eSky Honeybee King 2, as well as the Belt CP. But in this case, there is a specific place for the battery that sits there. Okay, if you look at the back section here where the gyro sits on, there's a little block in there which is called the tail boom mount. Now this little block that sits in here is the block that holds the tail boom in place and also tensions it. Now why is it important to tension this is because you would move the tail boom, loosen these 4 bolts and move the tail boom backwards or forwards to tension your tail drive belt. Okay, so you must always make sure that these little bolts are tight. Okay, right, if I move a bit down, you'll see that there are 2 rods that move up on towards the tail boom itself. These are called the tail boom support rods. They are quite important in the sense that they will keep your tail boom, or help support your tail boom once you start flying around a little bit more roughly. Okay, right. As you move down the tail boom, you'll note that the first thing that you'll notice is that there are 2 black rings here and here. Now, another thing that you'll notice is that there's a metal rod that runs through them. This metal rod is called the tail rotor control rod. This rod is connected to your tail servo, and as you move the servo, you'll see that the tail pitch on the helicopter changes. Okay, so this controls the pitch on the tail rotor. Now these little brackets or rings, or whatever you want to call them, are called tail rotor control guides. And what they do is they prevent the tail rotor control rod from bending or vibrating. The last thing that you want on your helicopter is unnecessary inputs on your tail rotor. Okay, now unnecessary inputs on your tail rotor will cause the tail of the helicopter to move from side to side or oscillate from side to side. You don't want that. You want your helicopter tail to be nice and sturdy. The next thing that you will notice on your helicopter as you move down the tail boom is a little fin that sits on top of your tail boom. This fin is called the horizontal stabilizer. Now the horizontal stabilizer serves no aerodynamic purpose at all. The only thing it really does is that it makes your helicopter look cool, and as well as that this fin is normally omitted from the bigger helicopters. So normally if you see a 90 size helicopter, you will not see the horizontal stabilizer fin on the helicopter. If we turn the helicopter on its side again, that you'll notice that there's underneath the horizontal stabilizer that there's a little plastic bracket, and on top of the stabilizer you'll notice that there's 2 screws that go through them and into the bracket at the bottom. This bracket is called the stabilizer mount. Okay, this mount also contains the mounting points for your tail boom support rods that you see here. You see it goes directly into the stabilizer mount on the side there. Right, if we move even further back on the tail boom, I'm just moving the chopper a little bit, you will see that there's another fin here called the vertical stabilizer fin. Now the vertical stabilizer fin only has one major purpose, and it's quite an important purpose that it has. What this does is, should you come down tail first onto the ground, this will prevent the tail rotor from hitting the ground. As you can see, there's a nice little distance between the tail rotor and my other hand, which simulates being the ground. Okay. Aerodynamically, this part does not serve any purpose at all. Some people claim that it does actually control the direction on the tail. This is not so at all. As you can see, there's holes in here. It does not act like a wing or anything to the nature of a wing, so it cannot do anything aerodynamically to the tail. The only thing that gives direction to a helicopter on the tail for these helicopters that we use are the tail rotors. Right, the first and most important part that I would like to point out to you is this big part here, which bolts directly onto your tail boom. Okay. This little part here is called the tail rotor casing, and it contains the gear that basically is driven by the belt coming through the tail boom, as well as the tail drive guide, which is a little wheel right on top here. I'll try and zoom it in for you a bit. That little wheel here is called the tail drive guide. Okay, this is basically just a little tensioner and make sure that it fits nice and snugly on that end gear. I'll try and tilt it. You can see the gear inside there with the belt. Okay, and that little guide wheel there just makes sure that the belt fits nice and tightly onto the gear that's inside there and prevents it from slipping. Okay. Right, and I think what we should do to explain the parts on the tail rotor is move it in from one side. Okay. You'll see the tail rotor control rod coming in there onto a little lever. I'll just try and show you. There's a little angular lever there, which is called the tail rotor control arm. And as you see, if I move the servo, you can see that that arm moves, and you can see that that arm actually moves the tail pitch assembly up and down. Now the tail pitch assembly is this little part. The tail pitch assembly is this little part here, and you can see that it's connected to the ball links, which is then connected to the tail rotors themselves. As you can see, if the tail pitch assembly moves there, you can see the pitch changing on the rotor blades. Right, now if I turn the chopper on the side again, you can see here that there's numerous parts on the tail rotor where the blades are. I'm actually just going to try and move it a bit closer for you so you can see better. Right, you can see that essentially it's three parts, and two of them looks the same, and then we've got a center in the middle there, a center part in the middle there. The two parts on the sides are called the tail rotor holders. Okay, they basically look more or less the same as the rotor clamps on the main rotor blade, except they're quite a bit smaller. Right, and then the part in the middle there is called the tail rotor hub. Now inside the holders here are all the necessary bearings to allow this assembly to move smoothly. Anybody that's flown helicopters for a while will tell you that your tail rotor is probably the most important part on your helicopter. If you lose your tail rotor, you lose your helicopter. End of story. Okay. Right, and that's basically your tail rotor assembly. These are the main parts that could break should your helicopter fall and have a rotor strike, tail rotor strike. Okay. So now, that's basically what your body, all the parts in your body is about.